Prologue. When DNA becomes a time machine, deep within the buried bones of ancient Armenians lies a story that written history left untold, a narrative of human survival, cultural adaptation, and the remarkable capacity of communities to maintain identity across epochs of upheaval. Ancient DNA, the fragmented genetic material preserved in skeletal remains excavated from archaeological sites across the Armenian highlands, has become an unexpected historian. These molecules, preserved for thousands of years in burial sites and cave deposits, now speak with a clarity that historical texts never could. They reveal the true story of how populations moved, mixed, adapted, and ultimately transformed while remaining rooted to their homeland. This is the story of the Armenians, not as told by ancient chroniclers or interpreted through political lenses, but as written in the very biological essence of a people. The human story preserved in Armenian DNA is profound in its implications. It challenges our assumptions about how civilizations are built, how cultures change, and what it means to remain Armenian across 8,000 years of history. It reveals that identity is not merely a matter of conquest and replacement, but of gradual integration, selective adaptation, and the remarkable resilience of communities that maintain their core even as external circumstances transform dramatically. The Bronze Age mixing. When worlds collided on the Armenian plateau, one of the most significant discoveries from ancient Armenian DNA is what researchers call the Bronze Age mixing event, a period of dramatic population interaction that fundamentally shaped modern Armenian identity. Genetic analysis reveals that Armenian diversity can be explained by several mixtures of Eurasian populations that occurred between approximately 3000 and 2000 BCE, a period characterized by major population migrations after the domestication of the horse, appearance of chariots, and the rise of advanced civilizations in the Near East. This was not a peaceful blending. The Bronze Age was an era of unprecedented dynamism in Eurasia. Horse domestication revolutionized warfare and transportation. Chariots transformed military technology. New trade networks connected distant civilizations. Ambitious empires rose and competed for dominance. In this turbulent era, the Armenian highlands were not peripheral backwaters, but centers of interaction and exchange. The genetic data reveals that during this period, populations from multiple sources, individuals carrying ancestries linked to Anatolian farmers, the Caucasus, and Central Asian steppe peoples, moved into or integrated with the Armenian highlands. The genetic signals clearly show Armenian diversity resulting from multiple population mixtures during this Bronze Age period, reflecting the interconnected world of ancient Eurasia. But here is the crucial point. This mixing was not complete population replacement. The existing population was not annihilated and replaced wholesale by invaders. Instead, the evidence suggests cultural adoption, selective intermarriage, and gradual integration. The incoming populations did not erase the existing Armenian population. They joined it, contributed their genes, brought their ideas and technologies, and created something new, a hybrid population that incorporated elements of multiple ancestries while maintaining cultural continuity. The isolation event. When civilization collapsed and Armenians endured. The most remarkable finding from Armenian DNA studies concerns what happened after the Bronze Age, specifically what did not happen. Genetic signals of population mixture cease after approximately 1200 BCE when Bronze Age civilizations in the eastern Mediterranean world suddenly and violently collapsed. This date corresponds to one of history's greatest catastrophes, the Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, the advanced civilizations of the Mediterranean world, the Mycenaean Greeks, the Hittite Empire, the great trading cities of the Levant, suddenly disintegrated. Major cities were destroyed or abandoned. Trade networks that had connected the ancient world for centuries collapsed. Armies of mysterious sea peoples invaded from unknown origins. Climate change, earthquakes, and civil unrest combined to shatter the interconnected world that had existed for centuries. The genetic evidence reveals that Armenia experienced this same period very differently. While the broader Mediterranean world experienced chaos and fragmentation, Armenia underwent a different transformation. After 1200 BCE, when Bronze Age civilizations in the eastern Mediterranean world suddenly collapsed with major cities being destroyed or abandoned and most trade routes disrupted, Armenia's isolation from surrounding regions appears to have been initiated, subsequently sustained by the cultural, linguistic, and religious distinctiveness that persists until today. Rather than being conquered, repopulated, or swept away by the same catastrophic forces that demolished Mediterranean civilization, Armenia became isolated. The genetic record shows no substantial new gene flow after this date, no major influx of new populations, no large-scale invasion, no wholesale population replacement. Instead, the Armenian population began a remarkable period of genetic and cultural isolation that would persist for over 3,000 years. This This isolation was not involuntary imprisonment, but rather an emergent property of geography, language, culture, and identity. The adoption of Christianity might have been conducive for the long-term genetic isolation of Armenians from neighboring populations. For centuries, Western understanding of Armenian origins relied on ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who observed that Armenians served in the Persian army equipped in Phrygian fashion. Based on this observation and linguistic analysis suggesting connections between Armenian and Thraco-Phrygian languages, scholars developed the Balkan theory, the idea that Armenians originated in the Balkans and migrated into the Armenian highlands. This theory, accepted in academic circles for centuries, represented a form of historical authority. It was in the ancient texts, cited by significant genetic link between Armenians and Balkan populations, thereby contradicting the theory of a shared origin. The genetic evidence does not support migration from the Balkans. Instead, Armenia's roots lay in the South Caucasus and broader Near East region, with ancestry deriving from a Bronze Age mixing of multiple populations in the region itself. This discovery illustrates a profound lesson about historical knowledge. Dominant narratives, even when they derive from ancient sources, can be wrong. The first whole genome study challenges the long-held belief based on accounts of the Greek historian Herodotus, revealing no significant genetic link between Armenians and Balkan populations. What a Greek historian observed about military fashion was not reliable evidence of population origins. Linguistics, while valuable, could not substitute for genetic evidence. Similar revisions applied to other historical theories. And the study also disproved the claimed Assyrian ancestry for the Sassoon Armenian population, which had been referenced in many historical sources, including the Bible, in cuneiform texts, and local traditional stories. Yet genetic analysis showed that the Sassoon experienced a significant population contraction in recent centuries, a demographic history entirely inconsistent with Assyrian ancestry claims. These discoveries are humbling reminders that historical authority, even ancient authority, can deceive. What we thought we knew about Armenian origins was substantially wrong, despite being embedded in centuries of scholarly consensus. Another story revealed by ancient Armenian DNA concerns Armenia's role as a geographic and demographic crossroads. The Armenian highlands occupy a unique position. Geographically and genetically, they link the Near East, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. Armenians themselves, as revealed by DNA analysis, form a distinctive cluster linking the Near East, Europe, and the Caucasus. This positioning was not incidental but central to Armenian history. The Bronze Age mixing events that shaped Armenian genetic diversity occurred precisely because Armenia was positioned at a crossroads where multiple populations met, interacted, and mixed. The migrations that deposited diverse ancestries into the Armenian gene pool reflect the movement patterns of Bronze Age populations expanding and consolidating across Eurasia. Yet being a crossroads could have been catastrophic. Populations at crossroads are vulnerable to conquest and replacement. History shows many examples of populations that were geographically positioned between competing empires and effectively wiped out or displaced. The Anatolian Greeks, the Nabateans, the Pontian Greeks, all were ultimately displaced or destroyed. Armenia survived. It maintained its population, its language, its cultural identity, and its genetic continuity despite being positioned at a crossroads. This survival is not guaranteed by geography alone. It reflects conscious cultural maintenance, linguistic preservation, and a strong sense of collective identity that persisted through millennia. The mountainous landscape of Armenia, combined with the region's distinct and very old language, strong national and cultural identity, and later the adoption of Christianity, were conducive to long-term genetic isolation and cultural preservation. The population contraction and resilience, an untold story of survival. An often overlooked finding from Armenian genetic studies concerns population bottlenecks and contractions. These represent periods when population size dramatically decreased, creating genetic bottlenecks that affect subsequent genetic variation. The Sassoon population, an Armenian group inhabiting the southern part of the Armenian highlands in modern-day southeastern Turkey, experienced a significant contraction in size in the recent past. These contractions likely correspond to historical catastrophes, invasions, genocides, forced migrations, and religious persecutions. Armenian history includes numerous such episodes: Mongol invasions, Ottoman conflicts, and the Armenian genocide of 1915. Each reduced population size and concentrated genetic variation among surviving members. Yet despite these contractions, Armenians survived. The population recovered. The culture endured. This is a story of resilience, the capacity of a people to experience catastrophe, demographic collapse, and attempted erasure, yet maintain genetic and cultural identity across generations. The DNA of modern Armenians carries the signature of these bottlenecks, but also of recovery and continuation. The Levantine admixture, when eastern Mediterranean farmers met the highlands. Recent research has refined our understanding of when and how foreign genetic influx occurred. Ancient DNA evidence shows a genetic input into the Armenian highlands from a source linked to Neolithic Levantine farmers at some point after the early Bronze Age. This represents a different type of mixing than the Bronze Age interactions, not the integration of Indo-European steppe populations, but the genetic influence of Neolithic farming peoples from the Mediterranean Levant region, the genetic makeup. Bronze Age, nomadic and farming populations added their contributions. Each layer represents a different era of contact, trade, and population interaction. Importantly, the geographic distribution of these mixture events differs across Armenia. Researchers found that the genetic input from Neolithic Levantine farmers' sources occurred at different times in different parts of the Armenian highlands, with western parts receiving this ancestry during the Chalcolithic period, while eastern parts received it through admixture occurring after the early Bronze Age. This geographic variation reveals that Armenian history was not uniform across the region. Western Armenian highlands experienced earlier foreign genetic influx, while eastern regions maintained greater genetic continuity. This reflects different regional histories. Some areas were more exposed to external contact and mixing, while others remained more isolated. Yet all remained Armenian, maintaining language and culture despite variable genetic composition. The maternal continuity. Women as carriers of civilization. One of the most striking findings concerns the contrast between matrilineal and patrilineal inheritance. Complete mitochondrial genome analysis of 52 ancient skeletons spanning 7,800 years, combined with 206 mitochondrial genomes, from modern Armenians reveals an absence of upheaval in the female gene pool over 8,000 years. This remarkable maternal continuity, contrasted with evidence of patrilineal admixture, tells a story about how populations change. When new populations arrived in the Armenian highlands, whether Bronze Age, Indo-European speakers, or late R invaders, the evidence suggests that predominantly men from these groups integrated into the local population. They brought genetic material, cultural innovations, and new ideas. But the female population, the bearers of mitochondrial DNA and the primary keepers of household culture and language, remained largely continuous. This pattern has profound implications for understanding how cultural change occurs. It suggests that invasions, conquests, and cultural transformations need not involve wholesale population replacement. Instead, new ideas, technologies, and values can be adopted by existing populations through cultural contact, elite prestige, and selective male-mediated gene flow. A woman raising children in the Armenian highlands across successive centuries maintained the language with her mother and grandmother. She adapted new technologies, adopted new religions, and incorporated new ideas. But her genetic material, her mitochondria, traced back unbroken to Neolithic ancestors. This pattern also raises questions about gender and culture. If women maintain genetic continuity while men experience gene flow from external populations, what does this reveal about the mechanisms of cultural maintenance? Were women the keepers of linguistic tradition? Did they maintain pre-existing cultural practices, even as invading populations' ideas influenced the broader society? The genetic evidence hints at these dynamics, even as it leaves many questions unanswered. Implications. Rewriting how we understand human societies. The discoveries from ancient Armenian DNA force us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about how human societies work. The old narrative was simple. Populations migrated, fought, conquered, and replaced each other. Winners and losers, conquerors and conquered. History was understood as a series of large-scale population replacements, with victorious populations displacing defeated ones. Radically, it demonstrates that geographic isolation and cultural distinctiveness can preserve population continuity across. This challenges our understanding of what constitutes ethnic identity. Armenians today are not genetically homogeneous. Their ancestry includes contributions from multiple Bronze Age populations, Neolithic Levantine farmers, and potentially other sources. Yet they share a language, a culture, a religion, and a profound sense of collective identity rooted in territory and tradition. Armenian identity is not maintained through genetic purity, but through cultural transmission, linguistic continuity, and shared historical memory. The modern implications. What ancient Armenians teach about identity. The discoveries from ancient Armenian DNA carry profound implications for understanding contemporary identity. They suggest that identity is fundamentally cultural and historical, not primarily genetic. Modern Armenians are not identical to Neolithic inhabitants genetically, yet they maintain unbroken linguistic, cultural, and territorial connections to those ancient communities. This perspective is particularly valuable in an era when genetic ancestry testing has become commodified and sometimes weaponized. Ancient Armenian DNA reveals that knowing one's genetic ancestry, while interesting, does not define one's identity or belonging. What matters is cultural transmission, linguistic preservation, and the maintenance of communities across generations. A person can be authentically Armenian even if their genetic ancestry includes contributions from multiple populations, just as ancient Armenians adopted foreign ideas and incorporated foreign individuals while maintaining Armenian identity. The discovery also challenges narratives of ethnic purity. Some political movements claim ethnic authenticity based on pure genetic ancestry, supposedly proving prior residence or entitlement to territory. Armenian DNA history demonstrates that such claims are scientifically unfounded. Real human populations are not genetically pure. They result from complex histories of mixing, migration, and adaptation. Genetic complexity does not diminish authenticity or historical connection. It reflects the normal pattern of human history. Conclusion: reading the letters, written in DNA. Ancient Armenian DNA has revealed a lost human story, not one written in chronicles or recorded in historical texts, but one encoded in the biological molecules preserved in ancient bones. This story is more complex, more nuanced, and ultimately more human than the simple narratives of conquest and replacement that traditionally dominated historical understanding. It is a story of resilience, a population that experienced Bronze Age mixing, cultural transformation, geographic isolation, repeated catastrophes, and attempted erasure, yet maintained linguistic, cultural, and demographic continuity across 8,000 years. It is a story of adaptation, a people who incorporated foreign ideas, adopted new technologies and religions, and adapted to changing circumstances while preserving core elements of cultural identity. It is a story about the limits of ancient authority, grand narratives accepted for centuries, embedded in classical texts and scholarly consensus, that DNA analysis has definitively shown to be wrong. It teaches humility about what we think we know about the past and the value of allowing evidence to challenge established beliefs. Most profoundly, it is a story about human identity itself. Modern Armenians are not genetically identical to their Neolithic ancestors, yet they are unquestionably their descendants. They speak a language with roots deeper than almost any other modern language. They practice a religion established in this region nearly 2 millennia ago. They maintain traditions, commemorate histories, and identify with territory across generations. The DNA preserved in ancient bones tells the biological dimension of this story, the genetic foundations upon which a culture was built and maintained. But the fuller story is one where genes represent only part of what makes a population continuous. Culture, language, religion, shared historical memory, and territory matter equally. Together, they create the phenomenon we call Armenian, a people who have traversed 8,000 years of human history while remaining fundamentally, recognizably, unmistakably themselves. This is the lost human story that ancient DNA has revealed. Not of genetic purity or unchanging essence, but of remarkable cultural resilience, adaptive capacity, and the power of communities to maintain identity across the full span of human civilization itself.